Welcome to the Great Loop Radio Podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. I'm excited for today's topic. We are going to talk a little bit about reluctant spouses or reluctant partners. It's something that we see pretty frequently on the Great Loop, especially at our events. And we've had some requests to cover that in a podcast. So I've had two of my favorite Looper ladies join me today, and we'll bring them in just a second. First, I want to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Curtis Stokes and Associates, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with that out of the way, I'd like to welcome Jacque Bentley and Claudia Fuller joining me today. Thank you, ladies.
Hi, Kim. Thanks for having us.
It's wonderful to do this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to see you both. For those of you who don't know these two ladies, Jacque and her husband Solly are our current True North Harbor Host of the Year award winners, and Claudia and her husband Dave are our current Ron and Eva Staub Volunteer of the Year award winners. So we've got some great headliners here with us today, and after you've heard that from them, you will certainly understand why they've been recognized with these awards, because they're absolutely fabulous in helping others to fulfill their Great Loop dreams. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the idea that sometimes one person in a couple is really gung-ho about doing the Great Loop, and sometimes one of them is not. So we'll be talking about some of those issues. But before we kind of jump into the Q&A, why don't we start with you, Jacque? Tell us a little bit about your looping experiences so far, because I know they're ongoing.
That is true. We started our loop November of 21 and finished August of 22, which was only a 9-month loop. And I must say it was much too quick. We went around way too quickly. But we're going to do it again. And we plan on leaving again in November of 23 to do a second loop. We travel on a main ship 400. For us, that is the perfect boat. Everybody has to find their own perfect boat and have different pluses and minuses and trade-offs. But for us, that's what worked. And I guess we got started on it because my husband was retiring and I told him he needed a plan. And his first plan was to sail across the Atlantic Ocean because he had done that before. And I was definitely the reluctant spouse on that. And I told him there was no way I could do that. And we came to a rendezvous, and Kim, your first slide was high adventure, low risk. And I said, I could sign up for that. I couldn't sign up for the Atlantic. So that's how our loop started back in 21.
Yeah, and I know that the reason for it going a little faster than you'd hoped the first time was one of your children was getting married. So that's a good reason to rush home. And we love that you decided there was enough that you missed that you're headed around again. So we'll be excited to see you out there again. Claudia, I know you and Dave have done multiple loops and lots of cruising beyond that. So kind of fill us in on those details.
Okay, well, we heard about the Great Loop several years before we looked for a boat. But David was retiring. David is my husband, and he was retiring in 2015. So we worked with Curtis Stokes, and the boat buying process went very smoothly and quickly. We closed on our boat at the end of March. David retired in May, and we were moved on our boat in mid-June of 2015. So it all happened very quickly once we found a boat. And our boat is a 1981 Viking aft cabin cruiser. The sun deck that is above the aft cabin was very important to me because we had a lake home and I had a huge porch. So that was the one thing I was looking for in a boat. And as it ended up, our boat is perfect for us, just like Jacque says. Most people find the perfect boat for them. So
yeah. Well, and something you mentioned there, Claudia, is actually a great tip for somebody perhaps who is reluctant is finding a boat that makes both people comfortable and happy and feels like home. So the porch there, the sun deck, was something that worked for you on that. So that's great to hear. Claudia, I also know Dave has kind of dubbed you the first class passenger aboard Stillwaters too. And that's because, at least particularly in the beginning, you were not necessarily kind of like all in that you were going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the boating portion of it. So kind of tell us a little bit about that. I know Dave is joking because I know you do a whole lot on the boat, but tell us about that kind of cruising style where you're the first class passenger.
Yes, and I'll use his own words against him. He says it's pleasure boating, so
Mm-hmm.
I intend to be as much of a first class passenger as I can be. I enjoy the lifestyle, and I have learned so much because we had lake toys and watercraft for a lake, but we never owned a big boat. So we didn't know about locking, docking, you know, the weather so much, that you have to take all these things into consideration every day.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you dock, every time you lock, even though you may be at the same dock, you may have gone through that lock uh, once or twice before. It's always a different experience because it's
Mm-hmm.
different weather, it's different water, and so uh, he can come up with many things to do around the boat, and I'm not always willing to do that. So I take my responsibilities that I have seriously, and I try to learn more every day, and I try to succeed at doing them. But I'm going to enjoy where I'm at, and so that's why I love being a first class passenger, and
Mhm.
I own up to that well.
But that's also like really honestly a great tip for someone who might be reluctant, because you and Dave have made it work where, you've kind of agreed that Claudia is going to do the parts that she's comfortable with and happy to learn about the rest. And I know that you know enough about the rest that if something were to happen to Dave on the water, you could manage that situation, and that's important. But you two have
Yes.
reached kind of a groove where what Claudia wants to and is comfortable doing is what she does, and Dave does the rest. So if one person in the couple is reluctant, that may be a way to kind of combat that as well. And the other thing interesting I love that Claudia mentioned is that when they started the loop, didn't have a whole lot of big boat experience and had never locked, and now it's to the point where they're have learned so much about this that Dave is actually presenting about locking through at our spring rendezvous next week. So it can be done even if you're kind of starting from zero. Let's bring you into this a little bit, Jacque. I think one of the things that sometimes makes one person reluctant is perhaps they don't have a lot of boating experience. So maybe they're kind of fearful about that and about the learning curve. And I know that you had some boating experience, but not like Solly having crossed oceans before. So what's your best advice to somebody who, maybe the cause of their reluctancy, if that's a word, is that they're a little bit fearful because they've really never done this kind of boating before? What's a good tip for them to assuage those fears a little bit?
Well, and what Claudia said, so often what we are scared of is just the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I know even for me, that was true in this. Yes, we had sailboat experience. This was our first powerboat. We've never owned a powerboat until now. So we felt like there was so much to learn. We're both engineers, and so learning the systems and stuff was not intimidating for either one of us. But I never fathomed that I would drive a 40-foot boat before
Mm-hmm.
and lock and dock, like Claudia said. Like I said, the unknown, and even it took me a couple of months into our first loop to say it's okay not to know the marina I'm going into, not to know the slip that I will be in. Um, it's okay not to know. But the more you do, the more you learn and the more it becomes comfortable. So you definitely have to jump in with an attitude of it's okay not to know, but I can learn. One of the greatest things that I think we did for a friend one time, they already had their boat, but she was very uncomfortable with locks and the docking and even doing the lines on the boat. And so we invited Melinda on our boat just to go for a day trip. And we told her husband, Keith, you can drive and meet us, up at Gunnersville. And that was wonderful because we were able to show Melinda how we do things Sometimes it's hard to learn from your spouse. And certainly I would recommend taking a Coast Guard boating safety class or something like that, or taking a course from a friend like we did with Melinda. But that has seemed to help her, and it certainly has helped us in learning how to do things in that manner.
Yeah. And that's a great idea. And the thought that sometimes the best person to learn from is not your spouse. There are several training captains who can come aboard and teach either or both of you. And some of them are couples who can come aboard and teach the couple from, both perspectives. So definitely a way to get comfortable is to seek out that help where needed. So that's a great idea. I think another thing, and to clarify, it is not always the woman in the couple that is the reluctant spouse, although that does seem to be more frequent. And I think for us women, it's a little bit more challenging to think of being away from family and friends for this long, particularly if there's grandchildren involved. And Jackie, obviously, you made that work by being home in time for that special event to be there for that wedding. And I know you're hitting another child's graduation from her master's degree right after the rendezvous. So it can be done, but I'm going to throw this one to you, Claudia, because I know you and Dave have, I think it's 7 grandchildren. Am I correct? 8. And I know that you're very involved with the kids and that Dave has even homeschooled some of the older ones. Yes. How do you deal with that, being away from them when you're out there on the loop or doing other cruising?
Well, we're very fortunate that as a family, our daughter has 7 of the grandchildren, and they would take family vacations and come to us wherever we were. And that's been some really special times. And the kids loved to come to the boat. And they love to come as a family on vacation or short weekends or long weekends, rather. And they love to come individually so that they get to, have their one-on-one time with us on the boat. And they truly are treated like first-class passengers. And so they love that. It's and so there is, of course, in this day and time, FaceTime. David writes a blog and does a travel map. So we keep in contact with them daily. We were fortunate that when we started our loop, that they weren't real young. We had gone through, I'd been there with them when they were babies and toddlers and, very, very young, and we had great times at the lake. But coming to the boat, they were older. So with them being older, they had their friends now. They had school. They had their activities. So even if we had sat around home waiting on them to get out of high school or whatever before we did the loop, they were too busy for us anyway. So it's worked out well because of their ages and the timing of our loop. So.
Right. Have either of you ever found, a circumstance on the loop where you wanted to be home or somewhere else where there were family or friends for an event and weren't able to make that happen? Because usually it's pretty easy to park the boat and go home for something. Did either of you do that during the loop?
Well, I think...
Oh, sorry, I should have directed it one or the other. Jackie, why don't you go ahead and then we'll come back to Claudia.
When we started in November, we decided it was too soon to go home for Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And so that was one time, and we actually had a couple of friends who, dear friends, and their children are the same age as our children. They weren't going to be home either. And so we said, well, y'all come visit us. And so they actually came to us. But otherwise, we have tried to make it happen. And even just recently, when we were in Panama City for the winter time, I had a cousin become ill. And I guess this is the thing I was going to say to follow up on Claudia. We made it an effort to go home specifically for that. And we borrowed a car and went home just literally for 3 days and came right back. So you can always leave the boat and go home if you need to in an emergency or something like that.
Right. And Claudia, you had something to add to that?
Yes. So one of the wildest stories that I have, we were in Canada, and our daughter and her family were adopting 3 children. Now, we had already been home to meet them, get acquainted with them, but there was a time period before the adoption could be finalized. And we were in Canada, very far from Texas. And we had not planned to go to the adoption party. But, there was that thing I really wanted to. So way up in Canada, spur of the moment, we were around Toronto. We got to rent a car and we drove all the way to Texas. And so we didn't plan that, but obviously it was important to us. And so wherever you are around the loop, it's good to remember that the intercoastal waterway and you're not too far from shore. So it's not like, yeah, there are times on the rivers you do feel like you're way out in the middle of nowhere, the sticks, but within a short period of time, you can get to where you need to be and do what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And at most of our rendezvous, we do have a women's session. Sometimes it's a reluctant partner session where anyone is welcome. This coming rendezvous this coming week is a women's session, and these are two of the four ladies that will be hosting that panel to try and address some of these. And I've learned a lot over the years by attending those. One of the best things I heard a lady offer as advice to others is that she was really reluctant because she was just so sure she was going to miss her grandchildren and her other family at home and her friends. And she was just not going to go. And her husband finally convinced her that, come along anytime you want, we will stop the boat. Either we'll both get off and go home for a visit, or you can get off and go home and you don't have to come back, but just try it. Just get out there. We'll stop. You give the word and we'll stop. And she said, just knowing that was possible and having that freedom from him to decide when enough was enough gave her the ability to just let go of that anxiety. And she never took that trip home, not even once. But she just needed to know that that was going to be okay if she did. And she let it all go and had the time of her life. So everybody's got something that's just going to make it comfortable for them to at least try.
Kim, I was going to add, the last 4 months of our loop, we did not go home for 4 months. And because we were trying to get home. And I told Solly that, that was a little long for me. Mm-hmm. And that next time around, every 8 weeks or so, we would just have it planned. Around 8 weeks, go see one of our kids or go home to see our siblings. And just knowing that we're thinking it's okay to get off the boat and go home makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and take a break there. I want to play a couple of messages from some of our sponsors. When we come back, I have, kind of more things that tend to be some of those troublesome points for somebody who's reluctant, and we'll get some tips from both of you on how they might deal with those. So we'll be back in a moment. An alternative to the high cost of brokerage and the hassle and risks of buy-owner boat selling, YachtX.com makes selling your boat easy, safe, and produces better outcomes. Licensed and bonded, YachtX combines the comfort of professional advisors with the reach of multi-platform marketing and the convenience of web transaction management and escrow, so your experience is second to none. Best of all, with fees of just 1.5% or less, you save 85% or more in selling costs versus traditional brokerage. Ask them about their buyer representation rebates, YachtX Rewards referral program, and Looper discounts. Boaters come first at YachtX.com. Our friends at Argo Navigation have created a free boating app that gives AGLCA boaters an easier way to plan their trip, navigate safely, and share information with fellow loopers. Argo has nautical chart coverage throughout North America, auto or manual routing, depths and tracks to avoid shallow water, trip details while en route, and a captain's log to save everything. You can also see other boaters, message them, and share experiences with in-app social features. Coming soon is a premium version with weather, wind, tides, offline charts, and more. Download the Argo Boating app on the App Store or Google Play. We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. My guests today are Jacque Bentley and Claudia Fuller. They are filling us in on some ideas. Perhaps if you are a reluctant spouse or a reluctant partner, and your significant other is all gung-ho about the Great Loop and you're just having a little bit of trouble getting there, there's lots of reasons. Everybody's got, some reasons why that could be, but we're working through some of them today and giving some suggestions or advice on how you might try to get past that. Let's talk about the idea of as you both said, you did this shortly after your husband's retired. It's a different lifestyle as soon as you're retired. You're spending a whole lot more time with your spouse than you did before. And now you're looking at doing it in a pretty small space, most likely compared to where you lived for your dirt home. And that's really a big concern. I've heard people, even recently who have been, completed the loop and said, our friends are surprised we're still married after we got on this boat together and we're gone for a year. But it is a real concern for some people. So were either of you concerned about that? And just from being out there with so many other loopers, have you seen others who have found a way to overcome that? I'll let you go first on this one, Claudia.
I wasn't really concerned about it because I had found my place on the boat. I had several places picked out that if I needed my own time, which I do, I can go there and he can have his area, And I mentioned Curtis Stokes earlier, and David recently went back to work, and we jokingly call it a sabbatical from retirement. But so Curtis asked me, he said, "Oh, are you going to enjoy your DFDs?" And I thought, what is a DFD? And my husband's name is David. It's David Free Days. So even on, yes, I enjoy my DFDs or my DF space, a David Free space. And even if you're on a small boat and you don't have as much room as I do to have your own, I have several places on the boat that are mine, and but for Canada, for instance, the locks, most every one of them, if you dock at the lock, tie up at the lock, rather, there's a park there. They have porch top swings, they have chairs. All around the loop are wonderful parks, and even if you come to a place and you can't get out and feel safe in a park or whatever, leave him on the boat to do man chores and go shopping, go get your hair done. I mean, there's many, many ways to get your own space, which we all need.
How about you, Jacque? Anything to add?
Oh, that's definitely the same thing. Now, Solly, it doesn't bother him at all, but there are days that I need my space, and I will just tell it. The last 4 years he was working, he was working back in downtown Atlanta, and we lived 2 hours north in North Georgia. So we had a 1-bedroom condo in Atlanta. We laughingly said that prepared us to get ready for a boat, was living in a 1-bedroom condo together. But I'm like Claudia, and the communication is such an important part, because there were days that I would just say, I need my space. You go to the upper helm and I'm staying downstairs. And we just had to have those days that we had our space, and that's okay. But you do spend, and I would highly encourage, like Claudia said, when you dock, get off the boat. Even if you don't have a problem being with that one person, just the small space can close in on you. So get off the boat and just be outside as much as possible.
Agreed. And there's always great places to walk and things like that most of the time.
Right.
And honestly, we have found that there's enough of a challenge in a lot of the days that you're kind of overcoming obstacles together, which I think is really a strengthening thing for a lot of relationships. And I've heard lots of loopers say that they really come back with a closer relationship with their spouse because they've achieved this thing that really is still a pretty unique adventure, and they've done it together. So I think a lot of people do look forward to that, and we hear so many say it. We could probably go on with things like this for, hours. We try to keep this podcast to roughly 30 minutes. Sometimes we go a little bit over that. But I do want to talk about, and we'll let you go first on this one, Jacque. What are some of the most challenging things that you found to be challenging about looping, and how did you overcome it?
Well, like I said, my big fear was the docking, never having, these marinas. Where do I go? What do I do? What is it going to look like? And then I finally said, well, I've got a year of this. I better get over that fear. And so it was just accepting of that. But one of the things that I try to do is the old Boy Scout motto of be prepared. When we are going into dock, I don't, if someone says you're going to tie up on your port side, I have my lines ready on the port side. I also have them on the starboard side, and I have fenders on both sides of my boat, because you never, yes, that's the intent, but it might change. The current may be doing something, the winds may be doing something. You may get in there and someone may be in your slip and you have to go to a different slip. So I'm always prepared. Same thing with locking the boat. I have this wonderful bollard loop that David Fuller told my husband about that he made for me. And I encourage everyone to make a bollard loop. So when we go into the locks, I have two. I have one on each side of the boat. I have fenders on both sides of the boat. And that helps me when of an unfamiliar situation, to be prepared for anything, no matter what.
Right. Tell us a little bit, if you would, Jackie, before we go to Claudia, about the bollard loop, because since this is, most people are listening to the audio only and we are recording video, but we don't have one to show you, but just describe it a little bit so people get an idea of what that is and how it helps.
Okay. Solly bought a 5-foot piece of clear hose, and he put a line through the hose and tied it into a big circle. And then the rest of the line that he had, he put a D shackle on that I can hook to the boat. So this long line has a big loop on the end. I simply reach over and grab the bollard with this, make sure we're tight, and then loop it off on the cleat, tie it down on the cleat. And that's all I have to do when going into a lock. And it's just a very simple process. It gives it some firmness to the line, so I'm not having to throw a line over the bollard and miss it. I can do it one-handed. The clear hose is so stiff, I can stand there in one hand and grab the bollard. And so it just makes it so much more simple.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And Claudia, why don't you go ahead and tell us some of the challenges you've come across and how you overcame them?
Actually, in the beginning, my biggest challenge was myself. I was very unsure that I could succeed at all this boating terminology. We had a training captain for 3 days, and he and David got along wonderfully well. And they would be talking at night. I'd hear them. I go, oh my gosh, they might as well be talking a foreign language. I do not know what, I barely knew what a galley was. A kitchen. It's a kitchen. Just call it kitchen. but there's terminology to boating that I just didn't even know the terminology. And so I was not a reluctant spouse in wanting to do the loop, but I was very unsure of if I would ever master the skills to handle what I should be handling on the boat. And I've said this before at other times, but some of you listening, especially ladies, some of the fears that we have, I don't want to sound unkind, but just do it. That doesn't mean you should do it unsafe. There's a huge difference in being fearful and being unsafe. And at any time that you're afraid because you don't feel safe, then you need to stop, But there are going to be, and then regroup, talk it out. There's been times that I've started to do something, maybe a lock would be a good example, and I just didn't feel safe. And David had to quickly readjust and come down and take that over for me because I didn't feel safe doing it. But there's been times where it's something I was safe. I was just afraid to do it. It may have been new to me, or the wind was too high, or whatever. But I was safe doing it, and just that's what I mean when I say if you're just afraid and you're safe to do it, just do it. You're gonna learn by doing it.
One of the things also to add on to Claudia is the communication. Claudia mentioned knowing the terminology. Know what the bow, the stern, the port, and the starboard are. Learn those simple terms so you can communicate with your spouse or the person there with you on the boat. And we just had an incident here at home this last week. And afterwards, I told Solid, we were having to move this really, really, really heavy glass top. And we talked through it. I said, I don't feel comfortable here. This is why. He came up with a solution. We talked it through. And I told him later, I said, had we not been on the boat, we would never, we probably would have never learned to communicate as well as we have now. It has improved our communications tremendously. But knowing and marriage savers, Kim's wearing her headset right now. That's all a marriage saver is.
Exactly.
We see people docking and locking and they're screaming at each other. This allows you to scream softly. Nobody hears you but your person on the other end of your headphones. And it helps with your communication so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with both of you 100% on that. I'm all with you, Jacque, on like being prepared and having the information. And those are the stressful times, is the locking, the docking. I do my information gathering. And yes, it can change and you have to be ready for that. But if I'm not comfortable with the layout or where's our slip, we'll Google on our way in for a slip layout for that marina, or we'll do that and look on Google Maps to get an actual view of what it looks like. So we're both on the same page about, okay, this is where we're going and this is the plan, knowing the plan could change. Locking, I'm always, looking in Waterway Guide to see, what kind of tie-offs does this lock have? Is it a cable? Is it a pipe? What am I going to have to do in this lock? And I found that out pretty quickly after a lock I felt completely unprepared for, that kind of caught me by surprise. And we did fine, but I was not fine. And that's where I was fearful. And like Claudia said, like, not that I felt unsafe, but I just didn't know what was happening because I was completely unprepared for it. And we kind of learned to do those things, and it makes the whole process so much easier. And also to Claudia's point, like, I learned that if I just wait for Michael to get the boat close to the wall and close to the bollard, it's going to be a lot easier than me trying to stretch. He's got full command of control of that boat, and I was just trying to do it way beforehand in case he drifted away from the wall or went too fast or whatever it was. If I just relax and wait for him to put the boat where it needs to be, everything goes super smoothly. So, and it takes some time to get to that point. I would say months for most people, a couple months maybe. I don't know if you two have a thought on that. How long does it really take to find your groove on something like that? Either of you have a thought?
9 months and I'm still trying to find my groove. I don't know.
Yeah.
Every day is so different. Even like Claudia said earlier, you're going into a lock that you've been through before, but the elements are different. So it's never always perfect. You're always looking for your groove. But yeah, it took me a couple of months for sure.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't my saying, but it's a pretty common saying. Some days as you're locking or docking, you're watching the show because somebody's having a really rough day, and sometimes you are the show.
Amen.
And you just, if you remember that when you're the show, it makes it a little easier to just laugh it off, and it happens to everyone, and no one looks at you any differently than that. Yeah, no, exactly. Nobody is going to be like, oh, they messed up coming into the dock, because karma will get you on that one every time. So let's just, as we kind of wrap up, let's talk about some of the rewards that the two of you have found in looping. We'll let you go first this time, Claudia. What's been rewarding to you and David about this lifestyle?
Actually, it goes back to we're a team. And so we need each other. And, cruising, working as a team, it's built our relationship. And so that's invaluable. Friendships with other boaters and people you meet along the way is wonderful. Some of the unexpected encounters with people, with events going on, things that you couldn't plan and couldn't make happen, but you got there, or even if you were at anchor, happened. And I know one time we were anchored out, and I was actually on the bow of the boat reading, and I kept hearing something. And it was pretty new in our cruising, and it was a dolphin swimming around the bow of the boat. And dolphins are common in certain areas of the loop, but I never get tired of dolphins. I always get giddy. But just sitting there reading my book, I couldn't have made that dolphin come around and, felt like that was my pet dolphin for the afternoon.
I love that.
It's just even if you're not wanting to do the loop, you'll experience the scenery, the people, the food, the shopping, just relax and enjoy where you're at.
Yeah. I love that, Claudia. How about you, Jackie? What are some of the rewards that you've found from looping?
Well, I mentioned our communication skills. I mean, we were always a team. We always communicated well, but that has really been improved. Our relationship is stronger now than ever. For me personally, getting outside of my comfort zone and doing this, the sense of accomplishment has been amazing. Talk about feeling great about yourself, to have that kind of a sense of accomplishment. And I think for us, it was a healthier lifestyle. We were walking, you're like I say, get off the boat. So we're walking a lot more. We're bicycling. People are all the time asking, how do we go to the grocery store? And we said, well, we both put on backpacks and jump on the bikes. And if it doesn't fit in a backpack, it doesn't get bought. But doing those kinds of things, that's been healthy for us. And I think particularly simplifying our life. Now, we could simplify a lot more if we would sell our home place and move on the boat full time, and not this. It feels like we have multiple homes we're keeping up. So that is not simple. But when we're home, as we have been the last couple of months since mid-March again, we're like, wow, we can't wait to get back on the boat. It truly is very simple life. And you don't need a lot of stuff to clutter up your surroundings or to clutter up your mind. And one of the best ways that I can say to go around the loop, and this is again another Dave Fuller saying, is you have 365 one-day trips. Don't overthink it. Don't make it overcomplicated. Really try to think about doing this just simply one day at a time. And that works for us.
Great advice from both of you. I think you've probably inspired a lot of reluctant spouses today to, work through what those issues might be that's got them reluctant and look for solutions to them. So thank you both so much for sharing. I'm looking forward to seeing you both in Norfolk next week.
Absolutely. We do too. Thank you.
Thanks,
Kim.
ladies. Yep. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's listened today. We will be back next week with another episode of Great Loop Radio Podcast. Until then, safe cruising.